Guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today we'll talk about the best places in the UK for the buy-to-let investments, or in other words, where to buy the property to rent it out to get the best profits. The first and most important factor is rental yield. So rental yield is the total annual income that you get from the property divided by the total value of the property. Or in other words, how many years it will take for your investments to pay back. For example, if the rental yield is 10%, that means it will take you about 10 years to get back the money that you invested into the property. So you're gonna get 10% of the total value of the property each year. So it will be about 10 years until you get the full return on investments. By the way, if you're interested in getting a property in 2023, make sure you check out my latest video on the housing market crash and what to expect from the property investments this year. Everyone interested in a property investment in the UK knows that the best destinations to invest in is north of the UK, north of England, and in general north-south essentially. So south destinations have some of the lowest rental yields across the UK. For example, in southeast of England, the rental yield is about 3.65% compared to the north where the rental yields are 5, 7, 8 and even 10%. There has recently been a data published on the 2023 rental yields and some of the best postcodes and the best cities in the UK to invest in. So let's have a look at this data and see what it tells us and how we can use it to decide which places to actually invest in 2023. Average rental yield across the UK is about 4.75%, with Scotland being one of the top regions in terms of the rental yield, with the yield of 5.7% compared to the second place holder North East with a rental yield of 4.72%. I will be mostly looking at the postcode data, so the best postcodes to invest in, but I will make a list of best cities to investment as well at the end of this video, so stay tuned and make sure you watch until the end. So the first postcode in the UK is BD1 in Bradford with a whopping 10.7% rental yield. Bradford also has one of the youngest population in the UK, with about 23.7% of its population being under the age of 16, which means a very large pool of renters and young professionals, students who are yet to save up for their housing deposit. However, Bradford has a very low house price growth rate. In fact, it's the only postcode in the top 10 postcodes in the UK that has a one-digit growth rate, which means you can't have everything, it's just a tiny reminder. So yes, the rental yield is very good, but the actual house prices are not growing as much as the buyers would like to. However, another city, Leeds, seems to have everything you'd wish for. So there are two postcodes from Leeds, LS2 and LS4, who made it to the top 10 best postcodes in the UK, which is remarkable by itself. So out of the top 4 best postcodes for the rental yield, 2 of them are in Leeds. LS2 offering 10% rental yield and LS4 offering 9.3% rental yield. However, unlike Bradford, unlike BD1 postcode, these postcodes actually offer a very large price growth for the houses themselves as well. So the 5-year price growth on average is 49% for LS2 postcode and 31% for LS4 postcode. It's worth noting here that there is no guarantee that this price growth rate is going to continue in the future, and it might actually just be at its peak. Number 3 in this list of the top 10 postcodes is M14 in Manchester. And while Manchester is a great place, it's a fast-growing place in the UK, and it's a great place to invest in, there is Manchester University, there are a lot of students, there are multiple advantages. The major disadvantage I see is the actual prices. So the average house price is about £222,000, which means you'll need to put larger housing deposit, you need to save up more money. Obviously, it does depend where you're at with your financial journey, with your property investment journey. However, the prices will be higher. Even the average monthly rate is about £1,700. That also means if you're planning to hire a company who will be managing the property for you, you will need to pay more. They normally take percentage of the monthly rent, and if the monthly rent is higher, that means you'll need to pay more to the actual company to manage the property as well. Another city I would like to mention is the one in Scotland, and it's Glasgow. And while Glasgow postcodes didn't make it to the top 10 postcodes in the UK to invest in, the actual city of Glasgow is the first in terms of the top cities for the rental yields. So for Scotland region, which is even more remarkable, 7 out of 10 postcodes across Scotland are located in Glasgow. The average rental yield across Glasgow is 6.91%, and while this is lower than some of the postcodes I mentioned previously, where it goes up to 10% or 9.5%, The big advantage I see in Glasgow is the fact that it's a big city, so it's about 1 million population, and yet the house prices are much lower than in other major cities. Like in Manchester, the house prices on average are about £222,000, whereas in Glasgow it's about £166,000, so it's much lower average housing price, while the population and the growth pace of the city itself is actually much bigger. The most remarkable things when comparing to the same data of 2022 is the top two postcodes last year were both in Nottingham, so it was NG1 and NG7 postcodes. NG1 actually dropped from the second place to God knows where. Essentially it's not in the listing at all, which means it dropped at least 10 places down, and NG7 dropped from the first place last year to the fifth place, with the rental yield dropping from 11.3% to 8.7%. What it tells us, essentially, you can't rely much on Nottingham, so it can be very good rental yields this year and dropping quite a lot next year. It just says how important it is not just to look at these tables, but also analyze them and compare them with some of the other data you have. Also, it's remarkable how Leeds rankings improved significantly, so LS2 postcode and LS4 postcodes were 13th and 14th respectively in 2022 ranking, and they both went at least 10 places up, so the LS2 is now a second place, LS4 is now the fourth place in 2023. This is essentially just a highlight of how Leeds is one of the fastest growing cities in the UK and how the housing demand and the rental demand keeps on growing year by year. Also, BD1 postcode in Bradford did strengthen its position as well by going from the third place in 2022 to the first place in 2023. However, Bradford strengthening its position essentially just still says how Leeds is strengthening its position as well, because BD1 postcode, the main people who live there are people who need to commute to Leeds every day. So it's about 20-minute train journey from BD1 postcode to Leeds, and it's direct train, so it's mostly going to be people who work in Leeds city centre but don't want to pay high prices for the rent in Leeds, so they're choosing to live in Bradford instead. Another thing that we as investors need to consider is the affordability of the place. So for example, Glasgow, while being almost twice the size of Manchester, actually has much cheaper housing than Manchester, and it still has very high demand for the housing, so it's definitely a better place to invest in than Manchester, even though Manchester postcode is in the top 3 of the UK best postcodes for rental yields. So looking through the rankings of the best rental yields across the UK, the top postcodes in terms of housing prices are BD1 in Bradford, SR1 in Sunderland and TS3 in Middlesbrough. So let's just keep this in mind when we make our final decision what are the best places to invest in the UK. Another thing that needs to be thought of is the number of listings per agent in each place. So yes, for example, Middlesbrough can be a great place with the great housing prices and a great rental yields, but if there are like 2 listings per month, it's going to be very hard for you as an investor to actually buy the property, especially if you live further away from Middlesbrough and the houses are literally going in days or hours. By the time you actually book your train or you actually have time to get by car to this place and have a look at the property already gonna be gone. So the number of listings per agent at each city is also a very important factor to consider. So the first place of the number of sale listings per agent is taken by Liverpool, with about 21 sale listings per agent, and cities such as Sheffield, Portsmouth, Bristol, Leeds and Glasgow follow shortly after. Another thing a lot of investors are forgetting to consider is how easy and cheap it is to travel to the place of your rental investment. You need to make yourself happy either with the cost of the full management and maintenance by a third-party real estate agent, or with the cost of traveling and how much time you're gonna spend on traveling to the property for inspection, for finding tenants, for the maintenance works, essentially for everything. If you don't want the company to manage everything, assess your own situation independently. For example, if you live in Exeter, don't pick the property in Bradford BD1 postcode just because it's a top rental yield in the UK. You actually need to consider cost of traveling as well. So if you're traveling from Exeter to Bradford, it's about 5 hours of your time, which means you probably need to stay overnight or even take holiday days if you're still working full-time, and the return ticket's about £200. The average inspections should be taken around 3 times per year. can be every 6 months, but let's take the ideal average of 3 times per year. So you need to spend £200 3 times per year, plus £100 if you need to stay there a couple of days. So let's consider you need to find a tenant, for example. So it's £100, also let's have 3 times per year. So it's going to be £900 that you actually need to consider when you calculate your rental yield at the point of buying the property. That's if you want to manage everything yourself. If you want a third-party company to actually manage everything, Bradford's BD1 postcode is actually a great place for you, because Bradford's average rent is about £500, which is much lower than in other places. And a lot of real estate agents are actually taking the percentage of your monthly rent to manage the property, so it's going to be much lower than in other places. However, if you're planning to have value-add projects, which most of the investors normally are, this changes quite a lot, because the renovation work requires you being on site every week, if not even every day, and you will be required to manage the project, make sure everything goes as planned and on time. So that means you probably either need to hire a renovation manager, which is again further expenses, or you actually need to find a place for renovation that's close to where you live, so you can keep an eye on it, make sure everything is going according to the deadlines. All of this said, it's possible to reimburse certain transport expenses if you live in a considerable distance from the property that you're renting out, and if you're traveling purely for the property management purposes. However, no one is going to reimburse us our time, so if you're working full-time and you need to take some holiday days to find a tenant or to manage the property, no one is going to pay us this back. Or if you may be working as self-employed or remotely, and you would actually be spending the time that you're traveling to earn some extra money, so that's still a loss, even though it's not really, you don't really realize it is. Now, if you decided that a third party is going to manage your property, the average maintenance cost for the property is from 1% to 4% of the home value per year. If we compare different cities, the home maintenance cost is going to be quite different. This becomes especially relevant if you're planning to pay a real estate agent a percentage of your monthly rent, which is normally how most of them operate. So I ran a comparison tool between B29 postcode in Birmingham and LS2 postcode in Leeds, and on average the prices are higher in Birmingham. Although you might be able to find an alternative option in Birmingham which is cheaper, it's still going to be more expensive on average, especially if the housing agent takes a percentage of the monthly rent. The monthly rent in Birmingham is about £1,900 and the one in Leeds is about £1,200, so you can see the difference between £190 in Birmingham and then £120 in Leeds. And there is a good chance that you might end up with the more expensive option if you go for the Birmingham real estate agent. Glasgow, in the sense, offers much more attractive pricing of the management and maintenance costs of the houses than the other major big cities. One of the most important factors is the growth and the rate of the growth of the city itself. So this one is a bit controversial because there is no actual city in the UK with the absolute population loss. So the growth of the city is considered based on different indices, and the indices are calculated using different parameters. So sometimes these indices can be contradicting one another. For example, Bradford has been called in 2022 the fastest growing city in the UK, and it's also been called the city with the highest level of the relative decline in the UK. So Bradford is a typical example of the overshadowed city, which means money that's earned in Bradford often spent in Leeds, so it's overshadowed by Leeds. And essentially you can see how it's damaging for the Bradford economy because people are earning money there, but they're not actually spending any money in Bradford. But at the same time, you can see how it's beneficial for the rental investments because people are living in Bradford and spending money in Leeds. So all those people who prefer spending money in Leeds, in the city centre, it's actually much easier and cheaper to live in Bradford and just get a 20-minute train to Leeds city centre than live in Leeds suburbs. So from the top cities in the UK for investors, the first one goes to Leeds and BD1 postcode and Bradford. The reason I didn't separate Bradford in a separate place is because BD1 postcode is still essentially offering you investment in the Leeds economy. So the advantage of BD1 postcode is easy access to Leeds, and most of the people who are living there, they are working in Leeds, or they're commuting to Leeds, or they're shopping in Leeds, so they have a lot of connections to Leeds city centre. In fact, any other place in Bradford, any other postcode is not a big advantage to invest in, and the only reason to invest in Bradford rather than in any of the Leeds postcodes is that it's much much cheaper. So if you are an investor who's buying a property for cash and you're planning to cover the full amount of the property cost with cash, then Bradford is much better option because it offers you much more attractive pricing than Leeds. And also, if you don't have enough money for the housing deposit, then again Bradford can be a better option, but you are still investing in the Leeds economy. Bradford and Leeds might be a bit controversial if you live in the south of the country, but again, Bradford's BD1 postcode has some of the lowest property management fees, so still, even if you live in the south of the UK, Bradford is a good option for you because then you can hire a company who's doing the full management of the property for you, and it's still going to be quite cheap because the rent in Bradford is quite cheap. Also, Leeds does have a lot more potential than Bradford, being in multiple rankings of the fastest growing cities in the UK. Second comes Glasgow with some of the best rental yields across the country, the fourth largest economy in the UK, and a very high number of sale listings per agent. Glasgow offers 7 out of the 10 best postcodes across Scotland in terms of the rental yields, and it's also very affordable, especially compared to the other big cities like Manchester and Birmingham and London. Birmingham and Manchester are also very good options for prospective buyers, but the reason they didn't make it to the top 2 because they're much more expensive than the other options. So you actually need to be either a settled buy-to-let investor with the multiple investment properties in your portfolio, or really be willing to buy property in Manchester or Birmingham rather than in Bradford, where it's much cheaper and you can actually afford multiple properties at once. Liverpool also deserves an honorable mention. It's not in the ranking that I mentioned before, however it's an industrial city that embraces modernization and its population is growing and growing, and according to some other rankings it actually has a rental yield of from 8 to 10%. According to Zoopla, the average rental yield in Liverpool is 7.02%, so it's still a great city for the property investment, especially if you're planning the investment for a longer horizon like 10 or 20 years. So what should you do if you're living in the south of the UK and you're thinking, well, I do want to manage a property myself, I want all those renovation projects, but I don't want to spend my time and money traveling to the north. Well, you could move to the north of the UK if you are flexible in terms of where you can live, for example, if you're working remotely. Alternatively, I'm planning to make another video about the best places for the property investment in the south of the UK, so if you're interested in this one, stay tuned, subscribe, and make sure to hit the bell button so you're notified when the video is out.